9 financial analysts from 3 of Bay Street's most respected firms had spent 6 weeks on a single spreadsheet, and not one of them could make the numbers behave. The conference room on the 22nd floor of the Harrington Grand Hotel in Toronto smelled like stale coffee and barely contained frustration. A projected slide filled the far wall, a waterfall chart of acquisition targets, discount rate assumptions, sensitivity tables, and all 9 analysts were staring at it with the particular exhaustion of people who have been staring at the same wrong answer. For so long they have started to suspect the answer is correct. Weston Byrne stood at the head of the table. He was 39, the founder and CEO of Byrne Capital Partners, and he had a reputation on Bay Street for 2 things: closing deals that other firms walked away from, and not tolerating people who wasted his time. He had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled to the elbows, which everyone at the table knew meant the patience was almost gone. "Walk me through the discount rate one more time," he said. The lead analyst, a man named Preston, who held 2 degrees from Ivy and used both of them as conversation starters, pulled up the Assumptions tab. "We're using a weighted average cost of capital of 9.4%, adjusted for the sector risk premium." "Which sector premium?" "The energy sector benchmark, as agreed upon at the outset." "The company we're acquiring isn't in energy, it's in clean tech infrastructure, which overlaps significantly with energy." "Overlaps isn't the same as is." Weston pressed his fingertips to the table. "If we get the WAC wrong, everything below it is wrong. The terminal value, the enterprise valuation, the entire offer price. We've been building a skyscraper on a cracked foundation for 6 weeks." Silence. The kind of silence that only happens when 9 people all know they should say something, and none of them want to be the one who says the wrong thing. That was the moment the door opened. Kira Navarro came in pushing a service trolley, wearing the hotel's gray and navy uniform with the collar slightly askew because she had already been on her feet for 4 hours and small details like collars were the first things to go. She was 32 years old and had the efficient, unobtrusive manner of someone who has spent years learning how to move through spaces where she wasn't meant to be noticed. She began clearing the espresso cups from the far end of the table, stacking them soundlessly on the tray, her eyes tracking the edges of the room the way they always did when she was working, checking for full glasses, empty plates, anything that needed attention. But when she glanced up at the projected slide on the wall, she stopped. Not for long, maybe 3 seconds, and then she went back to clearing cups. Preston, who noticed things when they weren't relevant to him and ignored them when they were, saw her pause. "Something wrong," he said, with the particular tone of a man who has never considered the question sincere. Kira looked at him, then at the slide. Then she set the tray down on the trolley. "Your beta coefficient," she said. "You're using a levered beta from a public comparable, but the company you're acquiring is private. Unlevered beta should have been relevered using the target's capital structure, not the comparables. With the debt ratios you're working with, you're probably understating the cost of equity by somewhere between a 0.2 and a 0.8%. The room went very still. Weston had been looking at the floor. Now he looked up. "Depending on your terminal growth assumption," Kira continued, speaking carefully, as if she understood exactly how unwelcome these words were going to be, "that could shift your enterprise valuation by anywhere from $8 to $15 million. Maybe more." No one spoke. One of the junior analysts looked at Preston. Preston looked at the slide. A woman at the far end of the table quietly opened her laptop. Weston looked at the person who had just said all of that. She was standing next to a service trolley, holding a coffee cup in each hand, and she was meeting his gaze with an expression that was not apologetic and not aggressive, just steady. The way a person looks when they are accustomed to being right and equally accustomed to that not being enough. "Who are you?" he asked. "Kira. I'm on the banquet service team." "Do you work here regularly?" 4 years. "And before that?" She hesitated for only a fraction of a second. "Rotman. I left in my 3rd year." Weston set down his pen. "Come with me." His office for the week was a corner suite the hotel had converted into a temporary workspace. 2 desks, a whiteboard, a window overlooking King Street, where the afternoon light came in flat and gray the way it does in Toronto in November. Kira left her trolley in the hall and sat in the chair he gestured to, still in her uniform, folding her hands in her lap with the particular composure of someone who is used to being evaluated and has decided not to perform for it. Weston pulled up the acquisition model on his laptop and turned the screen toward her without preamble. "Tell me what else is wrong." She leaned forward and read in silence for a little over 2 minutes. Then she sat back. "The terminal growth rate is optimistic. You've got it pegged at 3.5% for a company operating in a regulatory environment that's been shifting every 18 months. If the new federal clean energy policy changes again, which the last 3 budget cycles suggest it will, you could be looking at a terminal growth rate closer to 2%. That changes your DCF output significantly." She paused. "Also, your synergy projections in year 3 assume full integration is complete, but there's no acquisition timeline in the model. If integration takes longer, which clean tech acquisitions typically do because of the IP complexity, those synergies push out by at least a year. The NPV drops." Weston stared at her. "You said you left in your 3rd year." "I did." Third-year students don't typically know DCF adjustments for private company acquisitions at this level." "No," she agreed, "but I kept reading after I left." "What does that mean exactly?" She glanced at the window for a moment. "It means I have a lot of books and a daughter who goes to bed at 8:30. She told him the rest of it later that evening when the analysts had all gone and the suite was quiet, and the lights of King Street made orange seams along the floor. She had been at Rotman on a partial scholarship, competitive, worked for it, earned it. Her 2nd year, she had met a man named Mark who was finishing his MBA and seemed, at the time, to share her ideas about what a life could look like. By her 3rd year, she was pregnant, and Mark, when she told him, had been honest in the particular brutal way that some people mistake for courage. He said he wasn't ready. He said he had a position lined up in Vancouver. He said he hoped she would understand. She did not understand, but she also didn't have time to be destroyed by it. She had a daughter to prepare for. She named her Mila. She left school 8 weeks before the end of her 3rd year because the scholarship didn't cover childcare, and her mother, Ruth, who worked at a medical clinic in Scarborough, could only help 3 days a week. She took the hotel job because the hours were predictable and the benefits covered Mila's pediatrician. She kept her Rotman textbooks. She bought used copies of the ones she didn't have. She followed financial news the way other people followed hockey, not because she was preparing for anything, but because it made sense to her in a way very few things did, this language of risk and value and time. "You never thought about going back?" Weston asked. "I thought about it the way you think about things that feel too far away to actually reach for," she said. "But I never stopped learning. I just changed the classroom." There was a long pause. Outside, a streetcar rolled past on King. "I need your help with this acquisition," Weston said. "Formally, or as formally as I can arrange without making it complicated for both of us." Kira looked at him with the expression she got when she was deciding whether to say the thing she was actually thinking. "Complicated how?" "Complicated in the sense that 9 analysts with combined salaries that would fund a small municipality probably shouldn't find out that the person who fixed their model works banquet service on floor 22. She was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll be your invisible second opinion. But I want it understood, at least between us, that what I do is work, not a favor." "Understood," he said. "Good." She picked up her jacket. "And for what it's worth, your synergy timeline is also wrong for a different reason. I'll leave a note." She left a note. It was accurate. The arrangement became, over the following 2 weeks, something that didn't have a clean name. Weston would leave a printed section of the model on a specific table near the service station on the 22nd floor. Kira would read it during her break and leave a folded page of handwritten notes beside the water glasses. He would implement her suggestions without attribution. The quality of his presentations improved measurably, and the analysts noticed, and none of them could explain it. Preston told a colleague that Byrne must have finally hired a proper quant on retainer. No one looked at the woman with the coffee trolley. But Kira also did something that nobody at Byrne Capital had asked her to do. She talked to people. Not in a calculated way, just the way she always had. When a junior analyst named Rafe was struggling to explain to a new hire why the risk-free rate matters, Kira was nearby restocking the beverage station, and she said without looking up, "Think about it like a Tim Hortons double-double. The risk-free rate is the base. It's the coffee. You always start there. What you add on top, the cream, the sugar, the sector risk, the size premium, that's where deals get sweet or sour. Get the base wrong and the whole cup is off." Rafe stared at her. The new hire said, "Oh, that actually makes sense." Rafe had his phone in his hand. He was going to text a friend. Instead, without quite deciding to, he opened his camera. The video was 47 seconds long and went up on a Thursday afternoon with the caption, "POV, the hotel server explains risk-free rates better than my finance professor. No context needed. Bay Street Finance Talk." By Friday morning, it had 80,000 views. By Friday evening, 400,000. The comments were unanimous in their bewilderment. "She works at a hotel? This woman needs to be on BNN Bloomberg. And I have a CFA designation and she just explained the capital asset pricing model better than my exam prep course. And wait, is she actually staff? I'm so confused and also inspired." Kira found out about it from Ruth, who had seen it shared in 3 different Facebook groups for professional women in the GTA, which was how Ruth found out about most things. "You went viral," Ruth said on the phone, with the tone of someone reporting moderate weather. "I noticed," Kira said. She was folding laundry. Mila was at the kitchen table drawing horses with felt tip markers, narrating their lives quietly to herself. "Are you worried?" Kira thought about it genuinely. "No, I didn't say anything wrong." Mila looked up from her horses. "Mama, are you famous?" "For about 47 seconds, Kira said. Go back to your horses." Weston had already seen the video before Kira arrived for her shift on Saturday. He called her in before she'd had time to put her trolley away, and she could tell from the way he was standing, arms crossed, jaw set, that he had opinions about it. "You understand the position this puts the firm in," he said. "I understand the position it puts you in," she replied. "Those aren't the same thing." He paused. "People are going to start asking questions about who you are, about why a hotel server has this level of financial knowledge. And when they ask, I'll answer. I studied finance. I didn't finish. I kept learning because I wanted to, not because I was planning to go viral on TikTok." The optics. "Weston." She said his name with a quiet precision that stopped him. "Did I say anything inaccurate?" "No." "Did I breach any confidentiality?" "No." "Did I behave unprofessionally?" A long pause. "No." "Then the optics are fine. What's actually bothering you is that people are going to find out you've been getting help from someone outside your team, and you don't know how to frame that." She tilted her head slightly. "But here's the thing, you don't have to frame it. You can just let it be true." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in a quieter voice, "The board presentation is in 8 days. "I know. And you're ready. Let's go over the terminal growth assumption one more time." The board presentation took place on a Wednesday in a room on the 14th floor of a glass tower on Bay Street. Kira was not supposed to be there. She was there anyway. Weston had arranged for her to be part of the catering team, working the reception afterward, which meant she was standing near the door when the meeting began, holding a tray of water glasses she was not particularly needed to hold. The first 40 minutes went exactly as planned. Weston was precise, confident, and prepared in a way his team privately noted was different from his usual presentations. Sharper, more willing to address the difficult questions directly. The acquisition case was solid. The valuation was defensible. And then the representative from Hargrove Equity, a firm competing for the same acquisition target, stood up. His name was Donnelly, and he was the kind of man who arrived at meetings already holding his rebuttal. "I'd like to challenge the discount rate methodology," he said. "The Castellan Capital versus Meridian Clean Energy arbitration established a new standard for how sector-specific risk premia are applied in regulated industries. Under that framework, your cost of equity is materially understated." The room shifted. Weston felt it, that specific cold in the chest that comes when a fact you don't have is being used against you. He had never heard of the Castellan Capital arbitration. He went very still. He looked at his papers. He glanced at Preston. Preston's expression confirmed what Weston already suspected. None of them had seen this either. Then, from near the door, so quietly that only Weston could hear it. Castellan was a partial ruling. It applied only to vertically integrated utilities. Clean tech infrastructure was explicitly excluded in paragraph 41 of the judgment. Kira hadn't moved. She was still holding the tray, but her eyes were on him with a focus that was impossible to miss. Weston took a breath. "Thank you for raising that," he said, turning back to Donnelly, with the steadiness of someone who has just found solid ground. The Castellan capital ruling is instructive, but its scope was narrow. It applied specifically to vertically integrated utilities with dual regulatory frameworks. Clean tech infrastructure was explicitly carved out in the judgment, a distinction the arbitration panel made deliberately to avoid overreach into adjacent sectors. He let that settle. "Our methodology accounts for this. The sector risk premium we've applied is appropriate for the acquisition target as classified." Donnelly frowned. "I'd want to see the supporting documentation." "You'll have it by end of day." The board chair made a note. The room moved on. Afterward, Weston found Kira near the service table and said simply, "How did you know that case?" "I read the arbitration summary last month. It came up in a regulatory newsletter I follow. I thought it might be relevant, but I didn't know they'd actually use it." "You saved the presentation." "You saved the presentation. I just told you where the exit was." He looked at her, and for a moment, the room, with all its noise and congratulations, went slightly out of focus around her. He came to her at the end of the evening, the suite, the orange light on the floor. He handed her an envelope. She opened it. The check was for an amount that would have covered 8 months of her rent. She held it for a moment. Then she put it back and set it on the desk. "I can't take this," she said. "It's what you've earned." "That's not what I mean. If I take this, it becomes a transaction. You pay, I provide, and that's not what this is." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not a consultant you hired. I helped you because I wanted to, because it gave me something too, the chance to actually use what I know. A check turns that into a service, and I'm not a service." "Then how do I give back?" "You already are. You've been treating my work like it matters. Don't stop." She picked up her jacket. "That's worth more than a check." He walked her to the elevator, and when the doors were almost closed, he leaned in and kissed her. It was brief and sudden, and for exactly 4 seconds entirely right. The elevator closed. Weston sent her a message at 11 that night. "What happened was inappropriate. You work in this building while I'm here. I shouldn't have done that. I apologize." Kira read the message in her kitchen, with Mila asleep down the hall and the city quiet outside the window, and she felt the particular low weight of someone who expected better and somehow still got surprised. She didn't reply that night. The following week, he was professional, precise. He addressed her as Kira and said please and thank you and held every door open with the rigid courtesy of someone doing penance. She matched it exactly. Where she had once left him notes with small observations tucked into the margins, she now wrote clean, formal summaries. Where she had once said what she actually thought, she now said what was relevant. She was impeccable, and she was impossible to reach, and Weston felt the difference like a frequency he had only noticed now that it was gone. On Thursday, he found himself standing outside the service corridor at 7 in the morning, for no reason he could name, and went back to his room. On Friday, he asked Preston's opinion on the terminal growth assumption and spent the entire conversation thinking he already knew the answer, and it wasn't Preston's. On Saturday, he drove to Scarborough. He had looked up the community center. Kira had mentioned it once, in passing, a Saturday morning session she ran, explaining financial basics to people in her neighborhood who needed to understand loan documents, tenancy agreements, insurance policies. He told himself he was there to observe. He understood in the parking lot that this was not entirely honest. The session was in a room with plastic chairs and a whiteboard, and about 30 people, ranging from a retired postal worker to a 23-year-old who had just signed her first lease and was frightened by it. Kira stood at the front in a flannel shirt with her hair down, explaining compound interest using a jar of dried lentils she had brought from home. "Every time interest compounds," she said, moving the lentils from one hand to the other, "it's not just growing, it's eating. It eats the principal, it eats the time, and if you're not watching, it eats your options. The bank knows this. The question is whether you do. The retired postal worker raised his hand. But what if you already have debt? Then we start there, Kira said without hesitation. There's no shame in that. There's only the next right move. Weston stood at the back of the room. He was so clearly out of place. Good coat, Bay Street posture, the kind of shoes that cost more than the room's monthly utilities, that the woman next to him, who turned out to be Ruth, looked him over once and said, "You're Kira's boss." It wasn't a question. "I'm her colleague," he said, and then, "I'm not sure I've been a very good one." Ruth considered this with the measured frankness of a woman who has no patience for performances. "No," she agreed, "probably not." "Then she doesn't bring people into this. The work she does here, that's hers, not yours." "I know." "Then what are you doing here?" He watched Kira lean in to answer a question from a young woman near the front, making the woman feel like her question was the most reasonable thing anyone had asked all morning. "Trying to understand something," he said. After the session, when the room had emptied out and Kira was erasing the whiteboard, she heard him behind her and didn't turn around. "You're not subtle," she said. "I know." She turned. He was standing in the middle of the room with his coat over his arm and the expression of a man who has rehearsed something and forgotten all of it. "Calling it inappropriate," he started, "was the thing I said because I didn't know how to say the thing that was actually true, which is that I was afraid of getting it wrong, of you working for me and feeling like you had to accommodate something you didn't want, of needing you in a way I don't know how to manage." Kira studied him for a moment. "Weston, do I seem like someone who accommodates things she doesn't want?" A pause. "No." "Then maybe trust that." She turned back to the whiteboard. "I'm still not sure this is a good idea." "Neither am I, but I stopped being able to argue against it." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Come back next Saturday. Mrs. Okafor is bringing her mortgage renewal documents, and I could use someone who actually knows how to read a rate lock clause." He almost said something else. Instead, he said, "I'll be there." From behind him, a small voice said, "You're the man with the black car." He turned around. A 6-year-old girl with a purple marker on her left hand and her mother's eyes was standing in the doorway, assessing him with the systematic frankness that children reserve for people they have already decided to evaluate. "Guilty," he said. "My grandma said you make my mama feel strange." "Mila," Kira said from the front of the room. "Grandma said it." Weston crouched down to the girl's eye level. "Your grandma is right. Is that a bad thing?" Mila thought about it with genuine seriousness. "It depends," she said. "Does strange mean good or bad?" "I'm trying to make it mean good." "Okay." She seemed satisfied with this as a preliminary answer. "Do you know how to make pancakes?" "Grandma says people who can't make pancakes aren't very useful." "Mila," Kira said again, with more emphasis. "I'm working on it," Weston told her. Mila nodded slowly, logging this as a provisional pass. 3 months later, in February, Byrne Capital Partners held its annual recognition dinner at the Fairmont Royal York. 200 people. A room that smelled like white roses and melted butter and the particular warmth of a Bay Street evening in winter. Weston had done something different with the program this year. He had sent no advance copy to anyone. Kira sat near the middle of the room in a dark green dress Ruth had pressed that morning, with Mila at home with Ruth's sister and a promise to call at 9. She had told herself this was a work dinner. She had almost convinced herself. When Weston stood to speak, the room quieted. He thanked the usual people, named the year's deals, cited the numbers, a good year by any measure. And then he paused, and the pause was long enough that the room's attention shifted from polite to focused. "I want to tell you how this year actually happened," he said. "Not the version where I made the right calls and the team executed perfectly. The version that's true." He looked out across the tables. 6 weeks into our most important acquisition model, we were wrong in a foundational way, and we didn't know it. 9 analysts. 6 weeks. And the person who found the error in 2 minutes was not in that room as an analyst. She was clearing the coffee service. The room was absolutely still. Her name is Kira Navarro. She studied at Rotman, left her 3rd year to raise her daughter alone, and has been teaching herself financial theory from used textbooks ever since. Not because she needed to impress anyone, but because it matters to her. The way it should matter to all of us, but often doesn't once we have the credential and the title and the comfortable certainty that comes with them. He found her across the room. Kira made this year's work better. She made my thinking better. She made me better, which I suspect is the hardest part of everything I just listed. He picked up an envelope from the table beside him. I'd like to make 2 proposals tonight, in front of everyone here, because some things shouldn't be said in private. The room shifted, 200 people adjusting in their chairs. The first, I'd like to offer Kira Navarro a permanent position at Byrne Capital as a senior financial analyst, with full salary, full benefits, and the firm's complete support to finish her degree at Rotman on her own terms and her own timeline. Several people began to applaud. He held up a hand. The second is personal. He moved away from the podium. The room watched him walk toward the middle of the room, toward her, and the quiet became something different entirely. He stopped in front of Kira. She was looking up at him with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite calm. Something held carefully between the two. I know this is public, he said, quietly enough that it was just for her. I know you'll have opinions about that later. I have opinions about it right now, she said. I know. I also know you'd never say anything in front of this many people that you don't mean, so I'm counting on that. He reached for her hand. I'm not asking you to trust me because of this room or this dinner or what it looks like. I'm asking because I've spent the better part of a year trying to be someone worthy of asking, and I'm not done yet, but I think I'm finally honest enough to ask. He paused. Will you let me be part of your life, yours and Mila's? The silence in the room was total. Kira looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, at a volume that the nearest tables could just hear, I have one condition. Name it. Mila gets veto power. He laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded. Done. Then yes, she said, but you're learning to make pancakes. Ruth is non-negotiable on that point. The room erupted. Someone near the back was crying. Preston was looking at his hands with the expression of a man who was quietly recalibrating something important. A junior analyst was already texting. Later, when the dinner had wound down and they were standing on the front steps of the Fairmont in the cold February air, Kira's coat over her shoulders and their breath visible in the dark, Weston said, for the record, I did look up the pancake recipe. And it's more complicated than I expected. Most things worth doing are. She looked out at Front Street, at the streetcars moving past in the cold. Mila's going to interrogate you, you know. She has a list of questions. What kind of questions? Mathematical, mostly. She's 6, but she has standards. I'll study. Kira looked at him sideways. You're already doing better. He took her hand, and they stood in the cold for a little while, and neither of them was in a hurry to go anywhere. 4 months later, Kira walked into the registration office at the Rotman School of Management with Mila holding her left hand and a folder of transcripts under her right arm. The woman at the desk pulled up her records. You're returning after an absence? 6 years, Kira said. And your reason for returning? Kira looked down at Mila, who was examining a program brochure with the focused interest of someone who intended to attend eventually. I have better conditions now, she said, and there was never a reason not to finish that was bigger than the reason to start. Mila set down the brochure and tugged her mother's sleeve. Mama, can I come to school with you? Not yet. When I'm older. When you're older, you'll go to your own school. Mila considered this. Okay, she said, but I want to be in finance, like you. Kira signed her name on the form. Then keep asking questions, she said. That's where it starts.